Hello and welcome, and thank you for joining me. This is the part 2 of CRM analytics video. If you haven't watched the part 1, please go check it out. In part 1, I cover high-level CRM, the permissions you need, the front end, which is the dashboard and the application side of things. Today's video, we're going to dive a little bit into the data manager, the data that actually backs up all your dashboards within CRM. So let's take a look. I'm here in the Analytics Studio. I'm going to go into Data Manager. And just as a recap, we looked at this diagram. App is a combination of dashboards, lenses, datasets, and this part right here on this side is all about data manager, how you're getting the data. And you have local Salesforce data by default, that is your current org, but you can also get data from other external Salesforce or other databases, which is actually one of the biggest advantages of using CRM, that you get to combine data from various sources, create them into a recipe, and then spit out data sets from the recipe. So let's look into that. I'm here in the data manager. Let's take a quick tour. Here you will see jobs monitor, which is basically all the jobs that you have scheduled to run. If there are any issues, you will see warning or errors. Sometimes you may also get error. For example, if your recipe was using a certain field from your source databases and those fields were deleted or whatever, any changes happen in the data, you might get some errors. So it's really good practice to check your status, and for the most part I have all successes. And you can see I have various types of recipe, data sync, data flow, which is an older way of recipe. Then let's go into data assets. Data asset is where all your data sets will appear. All of these are various data sets. They may be created through different ways, but at the end, all your data will be in the data asset. You can also directly create a data asset by using a CSV file or tab.tsv.txt. CSV is the most common one here, and it will try to get the field limiter because I'm using CSV. And as you go next, here's where you can choose the app that you want to put this data set on. Private app will not be visible to anyone. Let's say if you already have an app that you want to put it on, you can use that. Just going to leave it to private. Hit next, and this is where you get to define your field type. So let's say if the CRM picked it incorrectly for something, and symbol is not a dimension, it's a date field. You can change that right here. Right now it's all correct. I just need them as a dimension, and if you hit next, it will start to create your data set. I'm not going to do that because I already have this. So that's simplest way of creating data set. Now let's look at connections. So as I said, we can get external data in CRM. So right now this is my local. So if you don't have anything else, you'll definitely see SFDC local. And you can see when that ran. You can also right here click on it and say you want to run a data sync or you want to disconnect an object. So if I wanted to run a data sync, I can just click on that and sync will run. You can also click here and you can sync all of the objects at once. You can schedule it, run now, or you can schedule it. So let's look at scheduling options. You can schedule it by minute, hour, week, and month. And you can say, run every whatever minute. So it really depends on how often you're looking your data to refresh. So let's say if it was like a sales pipeline, maybe a daily would suffice. So that would be hourly, every 24 hours. You can do that. But if it is something more urgent, then you might want to do more minute-based. I would encourage though just to be very conscious about how many times you're running your scheduling. It depends on how many rows you have in Salesforce, so that might take longer depending on the volume. So definitely needs some playing around and trying various options and see what works best for your use case. Then we have external Salesforce. This is a separate org altogether. Let me just show you what that looks like. So I'm just going to do new connection here. And the moment you pick that, you have all these various options. If your organization is using multiple Salesforce, you can use that option to add that name. All you really need is your username, password with the security token. So you'd be adding your password and the security token, and then the connection will be successful. Once that is successful, you'll be able to sync that data. Right, so I quickly added my different Salesforce org username, and the password is a combination of your password plus security token. You can request security token from Salesforce. And if you're making a connection to test or sandbox environment, then you may want to change the URL here as well. Just gonna hit save and test, and see the test was successful, which is why I'm getting this success message. And then it's gonna start to bring objects from the other environment. Just wait for that to load, and then you can also pick which object you really care about. You don't need to bring everything from the other environment. So let's say you only cared about account object, but you can also pick which columns you care about. So maybe I only need name and type. You can select those columns, and before hitting save, you can in the same screen select any other objects that you need in your org. After you select the fields that you need, let's just pick 2 fields from campaign. You can also go and preview your data right here just to make sure you're getting the right values. You can also filter right here. So if I wanted to only bring in certain campaigns, I could use the filter here. So when the object is synced, instead of getting all the campaigns or all the accounts, I can use a filter right here. And then you can hit save. That will then create the connection. After you create the connection, you then need to run it. So once you create it, it will appear right here, and then you can run the connection. Right now, I don't have anything in there because I didn't actually save it. This is my connection that actually exists. I have account, user, opportunity objects, and I'm able to run the sync. Another thing to note here is if I go to schedule option, you will have the same options here as well. Now let's talk about recipes, because if you are bringing any sort of external data into CRM-A, there is a high chance that you may have to do some data scrubbing, some mapping, joining the data. So all of that can be done inside recipes. So let me just show you what that looks like. I'm just going to go to new recipe, and it's a very drag and drop way to do recipes. So I'm just going to add some input data for here. And when you add input data, that means currently it is showing me all the various options that I have. I can also use the drop down to say, just show me the CRM analytics data sets. So CRM-A data sets means the data sets that you already had created before. If you created any sort of app or data sets, you will see options under that. If you have any external objects, for example, in this case, I use that Canada org, you will see them under here. All your Salesforce object will be under there. So if I just remove these 2, just to narrow down the filter, I can do that. And I can start with, let's say, opportunity or case, for example. So I can say, my data set can start with case. And it also pre-selects certain fields for you. You can always change that and add different fields, but I'm fine with the fields that it's selecting right now. Owner, created date, all of those look good to me. You can also get related objects right there if you have any. So you can add related objects, join them directly here. I'm not going to do that right now, so let's just hit next, and that created my case. I could also add more inputs if I forgot something. Let's say I also care about user, because I need to know which user has case assigned to them. So you have to start thinking in terms of tables, right? So the case we know is related to user through owner. For user, I don't need all these fields. I only need the full name of the user, and I need to know their role, maybe their title, and the user ID, because that is how I can link the user to the case. And let's see what else we have here. You can also search right here, which is also nice if you have a lot of fields. So I'm just gonna pick active role.name, let's just say. So you can do all that here. Hit next, and that also created my user. So now that we have 2 various objects, we want to link them to get the user attributes in the case table, or whatever data sets we're gonna generate out of this. So I'm going to join users to the case. The reason I'm doing this is because case has a lookup to user. So I'm gonna drop that right here, and once you see the green checkbox, just let it go, and then you have to select one of the options. we are trying to join them. So I'm going to select join option. And the moment you do that, a join node will appear. And you can see there's multiple join types. I'm not going to go into details with each join type. There are a lot of online resources to learn more, but just know that these are various ways how you can link one table to another. So let's say if you had a account table separate and opportunity table separate, how are you going to link them? Based on the join type you select, it will vary in terms of whether the final table gets all the rows or only the rows that match. I might do a separate video just to explain joins, because it is very important to understand the joins if you're working with data at all. In this case, we're just using lookup. That's probably the most you're familiar with because using Salesforce. Now, join keys is important. Right now, it just linked case ID to active. I can change that. I can just click on this. And I don't agree with case ID. What I really need is I need the owner ID from case object to match to user ID. Hope that makes sense, because the case owner ID is user ID from the user table. So we're going to use that as a join. Click add, and now you can see this is changing as I'm doing that. So what the mapping did is it brought John Williams' name here for that case that he's linked to. Okay, so that's what the join keys are important for. And I'm just going to hit apply. And that's it. So that's a join. There are other options. So if you hit plus, you'll see various options here. You can transform your table that's formed so far. You can also filter things out. So it's usually recommended to filter in the recipes than filtering in your schedule itself, in your connection. It really depends on the scenario. So let's say if your org has millions and millions of accounts, and all you really want to report on all the time is only on the active accounts. You don't want to report anything on inactive accounts. If that's the scenario, if that's the rule, then it's beneficial to do that filtering on the data manager scheduling side. So you can go to data manager, like you can go to your connections, and as you are syncing that data, you can do the filtering there, because you know for sure that you're never going to need inactive accounts. But if there are dashboards that is using inactive accounts and there are other dashboards that's using active accounts, then you don't want to add filter here, because then you're not even going to get that data in the CRMA, which is why in that case, then you would filter your data right here in your recipe as you're creating the data sets. So that's important to understand on where to use filter and why, and what does that impact look like. So that's filtering. You can aggregate things. Append, you can also join two tables together using append, which means all it's really going to do is if you have two very identical tables, let's say if you have opportunity table from one org, opportunity table from a different org, and if you're just trying to append them together, so this is different from join. In join, you are kind of doing a lookup. You are matching on an ID. So in this case, the case owner ID was equal to user ID. So that was the join. Append will be different because it's like identical tables, but you just want to bring them in one big table. So the column header should be the same. You are just adding the rows. So think of two Excel sheets with kind of similar columns, and you're just bringing them together. The join is more like a VLOOKUP in the Excel. Discovery predict, I'm going to leave that out for now. So what does transform look like? Let's see what that means. So transform really is more like you can, let's say you brought in status is closed and you want to call it something else, you can do that transformation right here. You can also change your column headers. So let's see. Gonna just try to change some things. And there are multiple options here. You can trim, substring, uppercase. So you can really transform your data right here. So let's say, let's pick an option. Status. So I'm going to click that, and I want to edit attributes on status. So what I can do is I'm calling it, instead of status, I want to call it case status. So that's a very simple transformation I can do. So now it says case status. There is also drop column. So let's say you decide, you know what, the contact ID doesn't really make sense. I'm going to drop that column. So you can drop that right here. And if there are other columns you want to drop, you can also start to type it here. Let's say user ID, I don't need that anymore because I've already found the linkage. So I can drop that just to make it simpler for the end user to use dashboards and explore things. I can also remove case ID and hit apply. So all of those columns will be now dropped from this view. You can also convert text to number. So let's say if you got the data in a text format and you wanted to convert in number or date to do more calculation, you could do that here as well. Obviously your data has to be in that format, so maybe 1, 2, 3, 4. So case number in this case is actually a text field, but I could convert that to a number field if I needed to. You can also use a formula. So let's see, I'm just gonna click that and add a custom formula. And you have a lot of options right here. So you can have string functions, numeric functions, date and time functions, multi-split. There's a lot of options right there for just formula. And you can then select whether you want to output the formula as a text type. Let's say I just wanted to make my statuses uppercase. Probably not a great example, but just to see this in action, I'm gonna do that. Scroll down, output type is text, and I'm just gonna call it case status formula and hit apply. And then there you go. So you have case status formula closed, and status is closed. So it's just turned everything into uppercase. So it's really powerful. You can do quite a lot in here. You can also replace values. So let's say if you had, you didn't like the closed. So if I wanted to replace the closed to something else, I can also do that. You can find values for closed and say, you want to replace it with something else. This is also kind of formula, but more easily done than formula. So you don't have to create a formula. You can just use the replace function. I'm not going to do that. And then hit save. This is the test recipe for case version 1. And you'll notice that this thing has this arrow. So if you want to go back to that view, you can just scroll this down. And then you're back in the section here. Now after transforming, you want to output this, because that's actually going to create a data set. So see the symbol here, you have this hexagon symbol, that's output. And then you can say you want to output a data set, you want to output a CSV. I'm going to choose a data set and I'm going to say case owner. This is the display. So this is what your users are going to see, your super users who are actually going to create dashboards. And just going to keep it same API name. API name can't have spaces and things. And you can also push the data set to an existing app. And then let's hit apply. So that's the output. Now you can save and run this. The moment you run this is where it's going to create the data set. So I'm just going to run this and hopefully we don't have any error. If you have any error, it will show you right there. Then we go back to the data manager or this view and go to your jobs monitor, and it should show you that it's running. So this is the one that I just created and it's running, and the type is recipe. I can refresh this and still running. We're gonna come back to that. While we wait, I just want to show you another data recipe that I created using Trailhead. This is a really good exercise and they go over a lot of various options. So in this case, I'm joining account to opportunity using opportunity account ID and account ID field. Then I'm also then joining user to that output. So you can join multiple times. It quite looks like a flow to me. Then you can filter things out and then generate an output. You can generate multiple outputs from the same recipe. It doesn't have to be one output. So then I joined Canada accounts to Canada opportunities, kind of did the same thing to get output 1. So this is where I used append. So first I got the output out of this one, filtered that data. So I filtered all the US data, and then I filtered all the Canada data and appended them together into one output. Same thing. Then I have a separate data file called the CSV exchange rates, and I wanted to pull that exchange rates into this final table. Then I did some transformation. I used a formula to convert the exchange rate to USD. So let me show that quickly right here. I dropped some columns. Yep, this is the formula that I used. I can go back and edit that. So I did amount divided by exchange rate. That was my formula to change the currency fields based on the CSV file that I had. Well, hopefully our data refresh is done, and looks like our case recipe is complete running. And I'm gonna go to data assets, and that is the data set that we created. I'm gonna click on that, and this is where you can explore, and it will take us back to our lens. And you can do count of rows, add your statuses as we did in previous video, and basically explore the data and see. You can add your owner names and things like that as well. One more thing I wanted to show about running and scheduling the jobs is you can also, on the recipe section, if you come to recipe, you can also choose when to run your recipe. So in this case, if I go to schedule, you'll see two options. One is time-based, which is running it in like a schedule. There's also event-based, and I'll explain the use case. So you can say, let's say if you had recipes based on Salesforce data, based on the external connections, then you wanted to run the recipe. You don't want to run your recipe before the Salesforce connection is complete, because then you might have stale data to get in your recipe. So that's why you can choose run schedule after the Salesforce local connection syncs. And you can also say, if your recipe is based on another data set coming in, then you can say run this recipe only after this other recipe is ran. And you can say local connection in the selected recipes as well. So this is quite useful. So in our case, what we do is run the recipe after the Salesforce local connection syncs, because my recipe is based on some of the data sets coming out of the local connection. All right, that is all for today. I will also link you the Trailhead projects that I've worked on. It was very helpful to learn all of this. I highly recommend doing some hands-on, but hopefully this was a good overview and was helpful to understand what are the different moving pieces within CRM-A